Welcome back to The Rick Smith Show. Now, here is Rick Smith.
So one of the things that I'm excited about over the next couple of weeks is the fact that out of this $1.9 trillion rescue plan that's hopefully going to have some survival checks in it, hopefully going to have money for state and local governments to get through this pandemic, and of course, the money that we need to get the shots, to get the vaccines, to get the infrastructure, to get this stuff out. Really thrilled about it. But the bigger part is, how do we use this opportunity to transform the future? How do we make people's lives better? Because I've been saying from the beginning, Biden's got about 6 months. People's lives have got to get immediately better and quick. And we use smart public policy and good spending, good investment to do it. One of the things and one of the areas I find most interesting and I think really important is ending childhood poverty. We've got way too many kids living in poverty right now, and Biden's got a plan to cut that in half within the first year, which I got to tell you, extremely ambitious on FDR level ambition. And here to share some thoughts on that, I've asked Alex Cawthorne Gaines to come talk with us. She's the Vice President for Poverty to Prosperity there at the Center for American Progress. Alex, thanks for taking time for us.
Thank you for having me.
So, I'm looking at this, and I got to tell you, the idea that in 1 year's time, Biden's goal is to cut childhood poverty in half is enormous. I mean, this is FDR, LBJ kind of stuff.
Absolutely. And the reality is, child poverty has been persistently high for a very long time, even where in the last 5 years, I think prior to the pandemic, we were seeing the poverty rate actually go down for 5 years in a row. Child poverty still remained high. And so I think it's hugely admirable and a huge gift to our community, our advocacy community, that this is a focus of President Biden.
Now let's talk about, because a lot of people go, well, what is childhood poverty? So what is the definition that we go by? I think about myself growing up. I grew up in a housing project on the west side of Cleveland. We weren't food insecure. We didn't have any food in the house. We were flat out hungry. We didn't have fancy words. I don't think people care about those. But what is the definition that we're using today on childhood poverty?
So there's a specific definition based on a threshold calculated by the federal government for poverty. But I should say that threshold is woefully outdated, right? Like, we basically calculate poverty based on a definition from 1963. And that definition based essentially what people could afford, like a healthy, affordable food basket for 4 people, as defined by what it would cost in 1955. So we have a measure that is actually really outdated. But what I like to focus on is what poverty really means. What our mental model is at this point is not consistent with what it really means on a day-to-day basis for families. So even, for example, I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but I think it's something roughly like $18,000 to $20,000 a year for a family of 4. But we know that if you're making $21,000, even $25,000 a year, you're likely struggling to make ends meet, that you're making really difficult choices and sacrifices, right? So you may be sacrificing buying, some additional groceries for the week because you have a dental procedure that your child really needs. You may be, in fact, sacrificing paying a utility bill on time, the heating bill, the cooling bill, because your rent is due and you're some dollars short. Those are the tangible things that we should be focusing on and thinking about when we think about poverty. And we certainly, recognize or should recognize that people who are above, particularly immediately above, 200% above even our federal definition of poverty, are really struggling to make ends meet on a day-to-day basis.
No, and one of the things that I had a guest on a while ago talking about homelessness, and one of the things that was a surprise to me is their view was the number one reason for homelessness, in the current times is someone's car broke down, and I'm going, I never thought of that. As you said, dental work being done, some minor emergency that is a major setback could make people end up homeless and end up living in poverty, or just look, you don't make enough money because the minimum wage in this country has been stagnant for more than a decade.
And I recall reading something. This is again from before the pandemic, but it said something to the effect of that 43% of respondents to this survey and sort of extrapolated to the whole population of working adults, could not afford a $400 emergency without going into credit card debt they couldn't pay off or without reaching out to a family friend, right? And of those folks, there was a significant percentage that actually, in fact, had no means to pay for that $400 emergency. So that could be a car breaking down. That could be a stove or an oven not working. And in fact, those are actually more expensive. I had to replace mine recently. That could be your refrigerator going up. Any kind of thing that you actually need done and you need immediately in your household that needs to be attended to, you don't have the resources to pay for that. And so that's where we talk about the fact that there are sacrifices that have to be made on a day-to-day basis that impact people's children, that impact their ability to be good parents when you're talking about poverty.
Yeah, and to highlight that, that same study, I think, said somewhere around a little over 60% of people couldn't afford $1,000 emergency.
Right.
So you start looking at, start thinking about where you are in this scale, and the majority of us are in a position where it's one hiccup that could cause major catastrophes, which is why I think it's important that we talk about, how do we get to a place where there is a safety net in this country that, people who are working hard, who are playing by the rules can actually sustain and maybe even, hopefully at some point get ahead, like I used to believe hard work could do for you. So what are you advocating as how we move to a place where Biden can be successful in eliminating half of child poverty in the next year?
Well, a big headline from that $1.9 trillion package, the American Rescue Plan, is the inclusion of expanding the child tax credit. That particular policy alone could actually make that impact on poverty that we're talking about. So sort of taking a step back and explaining what the child tax credit is, it currently provides about $2,000 to qualifying parents with dependents under the age of 17, but it's not fully refundable, which means that up to $1,400 of that credit could be received as a refund, where, in cases where the credit is worth more than what a person owes in taxes. But in the American Rescue Plan, there is an effort to make the credit fully refundable, particularly for this year. So in 2021, it's not permanent, but temporarily, which means that all families could receive the full amount of the credit, except for those that have very high incomes that would be phased out of receiving that. So some of the other really quick facts on this: it increases the basic amount of the credit from $2,000 to $3,000. It extends the credit to 17-year-olds for the first time. And really, really importantly, it provides an additional $600 for families that have children under the age of 6. CAP really had a huge advocacy effort going some years back on making the child tax credit fully refundable, paid monthly, and inclusive of a young child component, because parents really, have huge costs in raising children in their most formative years and typically have less income at that time. So that's a huge, huge win. But these changes taken together have been calculated to actually dramatically cut child poverty rates. I think a study from Columbia actually said that this could move an estimated 4 million children out of poverty and cut deep poverty among children in half. And so that's where a lot of the excitement from the community of folks that are particularly focused on child poverty is coming from. It's around this particular provision.
Now, a lot of people will go, "Wow, this is just socialism, Alex. Socialism. You leftist commies want to be giving stuff away." And I like to remind people that the Earned Income Tax Credit signed into law by Ronald Reagan, the sainted Ronald Reagan, took this idea from the sainted Uncle Milton Friedman, who had the idea of a negative tax, which would have given people free money. So this was a very conservative idea in its founding, even though we've lost conservatism in this country. But that was its history.
That's right. I mean, the reality is this credit would be available to working and non-working families, but there are costs associated with working, right? There are people, and particularly if you look at this pandemic, there are lots of women who have left the workforce because of insufficient childcare, right? And so this sort of credit, particularly because it's going to be delivered on a monthly basis, you don't have to wait till tax time to get one big refund. You would get it on a monthly basis. These are things that could go toward childcare expenses, maybe go toward the fare that you need for public transportation to get to a job site, to go to interviews, things like that. It costs money to work in this country as well. It's not, there's expenses that come with that. So I would argue that this is something that's incredibly helpful for workforce attachment for people who are having challenges, even meeting their basic needs to be able to get on that bus or catch an Uber or what have you, to get to work or to go to an interview. Right.
Now, again, I like to focus on the fact that, this isn't hippie liberalism. This isn't socialism. That, its founding was in Milton Friedman's negative tax. Much like the idea of a universal basic income was a conservative idea to make sure that people had a floor, that a consumer-based economy needs consumers. Now, he was looking at it from a business perspective, whereas where I think you and I would both look at it as this is a people thing. We need to make sure that people aren't going to go hungry, and that, look, it may not look like it now, but when I was a kid, we went to the cupboards and there was nothing there at the end of the month. And that was our entire neighborhood. And I don't think any child should go through that. So any way that we can make sure that kids don't go to bed hungry and parents don't have to look into their eyes and know they're hungry, for me is something we should be moving on.
Absolutely. And I should say that, this plan actually has seen some bipartisan support. And in fact, some of your listeners may be aware that Senator Romney actually introduced a bill a couple of weeks back called the Family Security Act. I should say, I think there's a bit of confusion because it's not an expansion of the child tax credit, as I talked about. This would actually replace the child tax credit with a flat monthly allowance that would be paid out to all parents. It's not something that would be delivered through the IRS. And his plan is actually delivered through the Social Security Administration. And in fact, it's even a bit more generous. Parents of kids ages 0 to 5 would get $350 a month, which actually goes up to $4,200 a year. And then parents of kids 6 to 17 would get $250 a month or $3,000 a year. So it's a little bit more generous. The difference between this plan, though, and what's in the current American Rescue Plan or the $1.4 trillion relief package is that this plan is permanent, but it's paid for by eliminating other programs that low-income households benefit from. So, for example, it would actually eliminate the EITC except for the one for adult dependents. It would eliminate the child and dependent care tax credit. It would eliminate TANF, which replaced traditional cash welfare after the 1996 reform law. It will replace the the SALT tax is the acronym, but the state and local tax deduction and the income tax. So it's paid for, by an assortment of things, but particularly programs that actually would that benefit our lowest income families. So that's a concern to us. I mean, I think it's exciting to see the bipartisan support, but we don't necessarily want to pay for programs that benefit low-income people by cutting other programs that they need to make ends meet.
Right. You want to create a new program that keeps people in the exact same place. It's one of those things that, I have friends who say, well, those minimum wage workers, they get, school lunch programs and LIHEAP and all of these other programs that they have to go and beg for. So, if we raise it to $10 an hour, they won't get that. No, all you're going to do is you're going to make their lives the same by raising it to $9 or $10 an hour. There needs to be a raise in the minimum wage that actually makes people's lives better, not just the same, only shifting around how they make ends meet.
Exactly. And it's how these things work together: increased wages, a robust safety net that actually catches people when they fall or they're unable to work. And really, our nation is the richest in the world. We have enough money. We shouldn't necessarily be focused on balancing the budget when we really need to invest in people and invest in our economy that's currently struggling. And we certainly don't need to pick one program out over the other, right? Like, we should make sure that there is a robust child allowance and that there's robust funding for other social service benefits. And this is an issue of political will more so than anything else. And I don't think we need to be focusing on balancing the budget on the backs of children at this point that live in poverty.
No, I'm right there with you. But what do you say, Alex, to the person who says, by giving out this money to people with kids, you're just going to encourage people to be irresponsible and have more kids? Because we hear this a lot. It's usually racially charged, but it's something that's always out there. What do you say to that?
Well, I would say that first, sort of looking at Romney's plan in particular, there is a cap on the number of children that would benefit from it. So there's that. But I would say, from a broader perspective, it's my point of view that it's not necessarily the government's job to weigh into people's personal decisions around family, the choices they make on having children. We don't need to be taking a regressive approach that actually generates more inequality for people based on the decisions they're making around their family and whether or not they're going to have additional children. It's really making sure there's a floor for everyone. We just should not be the richest nation in the world and have some of the highest poverty rates among other wealthy nations. It's just unacceptable.
No, I'm right there with you. Because look, I talk about this all the time. I was one of those kids. And it was because of a number of social programs that I was able to make it through childhood, to get a good public education. and then was able to get a good union job to where now I've paid back in multiples the amount of and this is the message here. I've paid back in multiples the amount of help that I was given, and I think that's what we should be what we should be striving for. We want people to do better so that they can reach a hand back and help up.
Absolutely. And I mean, even if you look at there's a wonky stat around how there's a return on investment with ensuring that families have at least an additional $3,000 extra a month. I think the stat was something like 17% or 19% increase in earnings in adulthood for children whose families get that additional $3,000. So, so we have the data to sort of even back up what you're saying, right? That making sure children have what they need and as they grow up really pays off in dividends in adulthood and in contributions to this country and just, being able to have their healthiest, make the best choices in their lives.
Now, I do find it interesting that Mitt Romney has this plan. I don't know how many Republicans are probably going to sign on to something like this, even though, as I said from the beginning, this was a kind of a conservative idea because, people with kids spend a lot of money. I know I've got 3 kids. It's expensive. And it's good for the economy. We need consumers. What do you think the chances of getting something like this passed through? Now I'm hoping the budget reconciliation we get the $1.9 trillion bill moved through and we start getting money into state and local governments and into the communities. But what do you think a long-term sustainable program of something like Romney's plan or hopefully something better? What do you think the chances of that actually happening are?
That's a good question. I mean, obviously this likely, the American Rescue Plan that's inclusive of the child tax credit expansion will likely see that pass. But again, to your point, it is temporary. I think with Romney's plan, there's a place here for some continued conversation and negotiation, right? Because there's actually some political will to make these child tax credit expansions permanent. But how we do it is still up for discussion. And I think that, for Democrats in particular, they sort of see this as an open door for conversation, how we might go about making this permanent, being able to pay for it. And I would say that there are likely other Republicans who care about, and even more, I guess you could say conservative Democrats who care about child poverty, who care about the issues around homelessness that we're facing. They come to this issue from different perspectives and different policy areas of focus. But I would say that there's still room for negotiation on how we get this done, and that there is some will to get this done permanently.
No, we got a lot of work to do, and again, it comes back down to our representatives. It comes back down ultimately to the Senate. If we can't get the Senate to move forward on this, and we can't get them to actually do their job, we're probably pretty well stalled, right?
That's right.
Sad stuff. But Alex, I appreciate the time, the thoughts, the work that you guys do there over at the Center for American Progress. Keep it up, and I look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Thank you so much, Rick. Take care.
Good stuff. I appreciate the time. Alex Cawthorne Gaines, Vice President of the Poverty to Prosperity Project there at the Center for American Progress. We'll get links out on how you can check out their work. Quick break, right back. Stick around. You're listening to The Rick Smith Show. We're working people. Come to talk.
Remembering that united we bargain, divided we beg. Rick Smith.